Good afternoon, fans. Welcome to another edition of the Old School Shooters podcast. We are very fortunate today to have a legit mixed martial arts legendary figure, Hall of Famer with myself, Jack Kilby, and of course, the King of Connecticut. We are here with the New York badass, Mr. Phil Baroni. How are you doing today, Phil?
I'm doing great, guys. How are you?
Awesome. Just so the fans know, without this being a total reiteration of your resume, you're a UFC champion, Hall of Famer. You've competed in bare knuckle fighting, Bellator, and several other promotions. So you have a wide resume in mixed martial arts and fighting in general. But King, I notice you've got a festive looking holiday jacket on it. And is that some Merlot there I see?
Tis the season, my friend, and this is the real Chooch wine. This is actually the real Chooch red blend that Massimo Battista and I import from Italy, our new wine, my new wine brand. And we also have the New York Badass wine that I started with Phil years ago, which was great wine as well, from his vineyard in Lodi, California. And Jack Kilby, the pleasure is yours, my friend, because you have 2/3 of the tri-state represented. You have the King of Connecticut and the New York Badass. And the New York Badass, there's a lot of stories I could tell with the New York Badass, some that I can't tell, a little too risque, Jack, for you. I don't want to offend your Canadian senses, my friend. But when it comes to being old school with the New York Badass, just give one example. Folks might have heard about the Monster Factory, the so-called quote-unquote Monster Factory. Those boys that like to go back at the end of the day and play with their joysticks while the New York Badass and I are out closing the bars and hanging out with Rob Van Dam and B. Brian Blair, pushing and pulling with B. Brian Blair, and Phil tossing RVD around like a rag doll, like a sack of potatoes, bouncing his skull off of the cement pond, as Ellie Mae Clampett would say. Good times. And Phil is definitely old school in the sense that he rock and roll all night, party every day.
Si, senor.
Yeah, so Phil's down there in Mexico, and I gotta ask my old friend Mr. Baroni. You know, I did an instructional for people because I'm a sophisticated man. I'm a man of many languages, and I like to teach Spanish, especially to the fine young ladies. And I'll do an alphabet for the vowels. A, E, I, O, U. El burro sabe más que tú. That's just a little lesson in Spanish. So, Phil, how is life down south of the border, down Mexico way?
Good. Living the dream, brother.
Absolutely. Now, do you remember that night with Rob Van Dam? Because Rob Van Dam went on a show of a friend of ours and told the story, but he didn't tell the whole story.
Tell the whole story, King.
The whole story, you know, that next day when Rob Van Dam's face was a crimson mask of blood, everybody was speculating that Phil had given him the beatdown, but he was just tossing him around in that pro wrestling match in the pond, just like a sack of potatoes. So Mr. Kilby, what questions do you have for Mr. Baroni?
Well, I have several. I'd like to start as per the custom in terms of what it means to be an old school person or individual in the modern era to you, Phil.
What does it mean to be old school?
Yes, sir.
Here when the party started, I guess. You know what I mean? From the beginning.
Staying power, if you will.
Yeah. It's better to burn out than fade away.
Oh yes, Neil Young. So in terms of your career, we're not of course going to cover all of it because that's very expansive. But wanted to touch on a few highlights of your MMA career as well as some of your pro wrestling endeavors. Starting with, I think all the fans would want me to ask about UFC 45 when you faced Evan Tanner and that situation where you ended up striking an official and being suspended for a number of months. What was the story behind that?
The official was horrible. He ended up getting fired, and that was the fight for the number one contender for the title, and the ref stopped the fight in a ridiculous manner, and I punched him in the face.
I got to
On
tell a funny. I got to tell a funny story related to Evan Tanner. Steve Nelson, they used to run the fight promotion at Amarillo, where Evan Tanner came out. He was in the He sent me this documentary about Evan Tanner, and Phil was talking about how Evan Tanner used to live in his van, and over there, and he was a little stinky over there in the Team Quest days.
What? Yeah. He used to live out. He had an old like a like a like a caravan, like a what are those things? A Volkswagen van. He lived in it. Volkswagen in the back of a car shop, a car dealership. He just lived in the van.
And he wasn't the most fine smelling man, was he?
No, I don't have to get a shower. All Team Quest stunk. Linland, all those guys stinky.
Talk about Linland, man. You talk about dirty. And then, Linland was just notorious for small joint manipulation, which fans may or may not know, bending fingers back. And from his wrestling days, biting.
Up your ass, going 3 fingers deep up your ass. He's the dirtiest player in the game, that guy.
He was filthy, Mr. Filth, Matt Linland. So those were some classic fights for sure. But Phil, one thing that Jack didn't mention in the opener, man, and a promotion that fans still long for, especially we're coming up on New Year's, Pride Fighting Championships.
Yeah, every New Year's is the big show in Japan. Every New Year's is the big show. The Super Bowl of MMA was in Japan back then.
Yeah, how did you like living and partying in Japan?
Loved it. Stayed there a long time. A lot of fun. A lot of fun, King.
Jack, have you ever been to the Orient?
No, I can't say I have, but as a fan of combat sports, I'm certainly conversant with the culture there and just the juxtaposition and how speaking in terms of MMA, only the best make it in Japan. But it kind of leads me into another question I have for Phil that fans always bring up, and that's your war of words with Frank Shamrock after your fight with Mr. Renzo Gracie in 2007. You said that you weren't going to tap, but ended up losing consciousness. Can you comment on that situation?
What do you want to comment? What do you mean?
Just in terms
of, he's a fucking douchebag. That guy, it's a prick.
Yeah.
What's the question?
Just in terms of how that went down, how the fight went down, and what happened thereafter. I think King, you've got an adjunct to that with Goldberg as well.
Yeah, I think Phil was taking Frankie boy down at will, and using Phil like myself got the solid tri-state New York area wrestling background, and Frank couldn't handle it in that fight. And then Phil had, of course, the famous groin pull. And it was kind of funny at the end of that fight where he whipped out the sausage and showed it to a Bill Goldberg. Yeah, that was a classic. Yeah,
What,
so I gotta tell you, Jack, on that note, Chael's son had said this before, and I gotta be careful of this myself in MMA, on the broadcasting side. You know, I just sent you those fights that I called. Being a bigger guy, you know, being a, you know, and I'm dancing for the female fans here without moving my feet. Being a sexy mass of humanity. Of course, I have the beautiful hair, unlike Bill Goldberg. I sometimes outshine the fighters when I do post-fight interviews, when I on the broadcasting side of MMA. You know, I'm much bigger, I'm much sexier. I can kick most of their asses, you know, especially all the lighter weights. And that was Bill Goldberg's problem in MMA, and Chael pointed that out because he was such a big mass of humanity, and he's wearing this big coat. And that's why he didn't last on the broadcasting side of mixed martial arts. You know, I think Phil gave Bill Goldberg his very best highlight in that of his career.
He was the worst.
He's so boring.
Yeah, he's a good guy, but he sucked. He was terrible. He was really bad. He was really bad, but he's a good guy.
which is kind of a segue into the pro wrestling topics that I wanted to mention. I'm told you don't talk about or like to talk about your family much, but as a relation to Captain Lou Albano, you must be well aware of the industry and actually did some training yourself under D'Lo Brown, I understand, approximately 2014. Just wanted to know.
He trained with the King of Pro Wrestling too. Don't forget.
Yeah, the King, D'Lo Brown, Disco Inferno. I've had great trainers, but yeah, you know, I remember Thanksgiving, the Wild Samoans at my uncle's house, and my grandfather, you know, in Capitol Albano, all hanging out.
How did you find that training for pro wrestling different from? And it's a topic that comes up on this show quite a bit in terms of the difference between a shoot fighting training and pro wrestling. What surprised you the most about pro wrestling training?
Just a bunch of geeks and dorks pro wrestling. Just a bunch of fucking nerds and geeks and dorks and unathletic losers. You know what I mean? A bunch of guys that couldn't play any other sports that you know got a little too tall for drama school and tried pro wrestling. It's a bunch of wannabes, phonies, and Phil
and I were on a mission to stretch these punks like rubber bands in the world of pro wrestling. I remember when we went to Double Cross Wrestling in South Carolina, and I brought Phil over there, and one of the main guy there literally, and this is a story, I don't want to even mention his name because it's so embarrassing, but he literally crapped his pants when Phil stretched him in the ring. I mean, it was stunk. It was disgusting. It was embarrassing. So we were on the mission to stretch these punks like rubber bands in the world of professional wrestling.
How about that time you stretched that dude remember those dorks at the Monster Factory? I forgot what it was. Yeah, and the King grabbed the coach. He was the coach of some Monster Factory, some dork dude, and the King stretched him in front of all.
Oh yeah, that was funny. I remember that. It was because they were trying to get us to train with them when they were in Charlotte.
Yeah. And he's like, and the King was like, "What are you, 5'3"? What are you going to teach me?"
So I said to the guy when they were they had their little dorky training, and they were trying to get us to train with them. I said, "What are you going to teach me?" And I hit him with a snap down and just cradled him up, and I was just playing with him, you know, just spanking him. And I spun him around and tied him up, and I was just spanking. That's how we do pro wrestling. There's not a damn thing that Phil Baroni or the King of Connecticut do in that ring in professional wrestling that we can't do to every one of you fat slobs paying to watch.
And with that nerd Riddle, remember that nerd Riddle? He said, and I put him in the can opener and tapped him out in 10 seconds.
Oh yeah, Matt Riddle.
I threw him around. Matt Riddle was there. All these dorks at the Monster Factory. Matt Riddle was there. It was long hair. I snapped him down.
It was funny because Yeah, put him in the can opener, and that was when Riddle was younger. He ended up
He thought he
WWE,
was
but
a fighter. He was saying he was a fighter.
yeah,
And
he got a case of pussyitis after that too, with a friend of ours who was supposed to wrestle him, and he ran away. He didn't show up. Yeah, so I mean, I miss the New York Badass in pro wrestling. Since he's moved to Mexico, I got to get down there and stretch some punks with him. Phil and I had a tag team called the Border Patrol, and you'll appreciate this, Jack, with your shoe jump. We had a tag team called the Border Patrol, and we were stretching. We were covertly working for President Trump. He wasn't quite president at the time. This was like 2016, 15. And we were stretching all these luchadors like rubber bands.
Yeah, we're wrestling on the Mexican circuit. We were beating up and we were Trump supporters.
That's where Phil got that mask, because he did that one match where he took remember you took the mask from the guy, and then we brought it around to do fan videos.
Yeah. do the voice when they put the mask on.
Yeah. They put the mask on, and then I start speaking Spanish. Jack Kilby es el mejor luchador en todo el mundo. Yeah, that was our gimmick with fans. If they bought some merchandise, Phil actually came up with that gimmick. We'd put the mask on from one of the Mexican wrestlers that we stretched. I put it on. As soon as I put the mask on, I speak Spanish. I start speaking Spanish.
Speaking of Matt Riddle and the WWE, I understand that there may have been a plan to bring you in, Phil.
I was going to do it. King was working out a deal with Briscoe. We had me all signed up, and then that dork Cody Rhodes, that little hater, was crying about he don't want me in the WWE. Yeah, he just crying. He just caused a big stink. That little hater, that little pansy, that Cody Rhodes.
The first time Cody Rhodes ever walked into a men's locker room, he started whistling "Stranger in Paradise." The only good thing about Cody Rhodes is that that buxom brown woman on his arm. Miss Brandy. She is a fine piece. And
I had her first.
I got to tell this story. I know Phil won't, we passed her around a little bit. We'll talk about that another time. I don't know if we should. But, I got to tell this story. When Dusty Rhodes was still alive, the American Dream Dusty Rhodes was still alive, he came up to Phil and I, because Phil and I did the convention circuit together. You remember this, Phil?
Yeah.
He came up to us, and he almost had tears in his eyes, He said, "I look at you guys, you ooze machismo. You're such men." And Dusty said, I always wanted to have a son. It was always my goal when I have a son, but I never had a son. I had one that was a little bit fruity tooty. And then I had another bowl, Cody. We have to play around with the genitalia, tell everybody he was Cody, but it really was Cody Ann. And I always wanted to have a son. And I look at you two men, and I have to tell you, with tears in my eyes, King, with tears in my eyes, Philip, will you call me Daddy? Will you please call me Daddy? And Phil and I both, we said, yes, Daddy. Yes, Daddy. Thank you, Daddy. And he said, and he started welling up, tears in his eyes. And he said, "Now I can die happy now."
Not exactly the Hard Times promo, was it?
No, he was much happier when we met Phil and I.
So speaking of some of your matches in pro wrestling, I did some research, and it indicates that you wrestled New Jack in 2016. No.
Did he? You did?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Jersey.
Okay.
Jersey.
Just want to get your recollections on that, given how wild and crazy and off script New Jack was known to go at times.
Well, he was very much in check and in script when we wrestled. He didn't trust me. He knew better. and the King warned him before the match.
Yeah, that's why I'm surprised, because I knew he was trying to back out of that. New Jack was, and I remember that was part of the bookings I got in Phil back then, and New Jack was trying to back out, but I guess Phil went forward with it. But that was always been the problem with the New York Badass. You know, we talk about the pussyitis that Riddle had. He was supposed to face Phil in New York, and he ran off, canceled literally the morning of. It's typical. They get that pussyitis, and they run off. They run away. Look, Phil's could do it too. You bounce it for the, Jack. Can you bounce the pectoralis? Jack's a big man. Jack's a powerful man, but we like to dance for the ladies without moving our feet, Jack Kelby.
I could do that on a wider angle, but I don't want to brag and make you guys feel less than. So I'll hold that in abeyance.
Jack's a big man. Jack's a powerful man, and he's I don't know if he wants me to mention his shoot job, but he's got a tough, rugged life outside of the podcast universe. Jack, have you ever spent any time in New York?
It's not a trick question, Jack.
Jack, I was asking Jack. I think he froze.
He's frozen.
Jack, we scared you off, Jack.
Take it over. Okay, I'm back. Thank you, StreamYard again. No, not on an extended basis, but before we run out of time, I have to ask the question that all the fans bring up about Phil's career again, in terms of MMA. When you fought Dave, I've got the name.
Dave Monet?
Yes, sorry.
I was there. I turned around and the fight was over. That was in Connecticut, Mohegan Sun. That was in my hometown. That was in my backyard. I was there with Phil for that, and he jumped up on the cage and tell him what you said. Tell him what you told the world.
That was the best ever.
That's exactly what the fans are talking about. What was that? Just a spur of the moment thing, or what made you do that extraordinary display of showmanship?
Man, I trained hard for that fight. I had a lot of a bent up frustration. I had to get it off my chest. You know what I mean? I took care of him pretty quick. And I just had to tell the world, what was up.
Awesome. As Lee Roy, one of the fans, are saying, Phil, one of the most memorable fighters of the early UFC and legend, of course.
Thanks.
I just interviewed Art Davie for the 29-year anniversary of the UFC, and Hannibal did too. And Art always says, the man that brought the electricity, that brought the energy, that brought the entertainment to the Ultimate Fighting Championships was my good friend, the New York Badass, Phil Baroni.
Knows what he's talking about.
And Phil, you've done some commentating as well. What do you enjoy commentating, or how do you
I've done everything. I've commentating. I've done porn. I've done you name it. I've done it in the film industry. Commentating, talking.
A jack of all trades. We've got another fan question here from Eric, who wants to know, do you still lift weights? Badass fighter. Again, of course. There's your answer.
Yeah.
And he lifts a lot of these fine Mexican women as well.
What Phil, in terms of the future, what does that hold for you in the combat sports industry or professional wrestling?
Whatever the king gets, I'm game. Whatever the king could scrounge up, I'll get on the plane to go.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's been my distinguished privilege to represent the New York Badass Phil Baroni over the years. He is an outstanding coach as well. And one of the things we do here on the Hannibal TV is I've been showing some techniques from the mat. Been coaching at Fighting Edge. And Phil, I'll tell you, Phil and I done a number of coaching clinics from young children up to pro fighters. And Phil is an outstanding coach. And I got some great clips I can send you, Jack Kilby, of Phil on the mat over the years.
Coaching those kids.
Yeah. We coached a lot of youth together, as well as
we coached it was the Connecticut State team for the Nationals. You know, we did a freestyle Greco clinic at there.
Yeah, I brought Phil up with me to my home state to coach the state team. We've done South Carolina. We've done New York, Texas with Kamal Shalarus and Phil. We've done it all. We've done it all on the coaching side.
Thailand, you know, we've done it international as well. Japan.
Yeah, I love Thailand. Yeah, absolutely. I love Thailand and the Philippines. You know, Phil knows I like my ladies a little on the voluptuous side, and sometimes China and Japan they tend to be a little too wafy for the king.
But before we wrap it up, guys, who wants to, or King, do you want to speak to the now infamous and well recounted yet popular strip club story?
No. We have so many strip club stories. I mean, Phil and I have run strip clubs. I don't want to point to one strip club story.
I owned a strip club.
Yeah, he owned a strip club out in Vegas. We had a great time out there. I wish Jack was around when Legends Room was open.
Yeah.
You know, but I do want to, speaking of strip clubs and strippers, I do want to direct people to the Hannibal TV, where I showed that snap down at Crossface, how you can carry guys out of the club and dump them. And I had that famous story about guy that I dumped out of a club and on the Strong Island Sound. I didn't know he was a connected guy and almost got me killed. But you're gonna learn a lot here on the Hannibal TV from Phil Baroni as well. He's a great coach, great fighter. And Jack, I want to give you some clips. I just thought of that, some clips from our past coaching clinics, so the fans can learn, because we're all about educating the fans. We're teachers.
Giving back, right, King?
Exactly. That's
which
the
is
stage of life.
Also an old school value, giving back and
old school,
mentoring the next generation, the old school values that we talk about on this podcast. Guys, do you have any last parting words before we go in terms of your MMA career, Phil? Anything you're interested in moving forward? And of course, King, once Phil's completed, I'll leave it to you to hit the tagline.
He's trying to get me booked. He had me booked for bare knuckle, but the dork promoter, you know, fucked that up. So I don't know. What do you got next? What do you got next, King?
So I've been talking to Ken Shamrock. Just talked to Ken Wednesday about bare knuckle, and he's really eager to have you on. And he sends his best. We're gonna have Ken on this show. On this, the cooler Shamrock brother on this show to talk about bare knuckle, and we need to get Phil out there to fight for that bare knuckle organization. But I'd also love to get Phil up to Great North Wrestling, especially in New York. When we do the shows in Albany, New York, Jack runs the wrestling.
I've done some wrestling down here in Mexico. I've been wrestling in Mexico, doing some lucha wrestling. So I'm pretty sharp right now.
Nice. So Jack, how about we look at getting Phil up to Great North Wrestling?
Absolutely. We'd love to have you, Phil. Definitely a legend and someone that I believe, based on what I know of yourself and your career, you've got a lot left in the tank and a lot to show some of these young kids.
Especially in the pro wrestling ring, you know, especially in the pro wrestling ring. And the King still can go too. The real shooters, you know, is definitely a tag team to mess with.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Phil. Yeah, and you know, I just talked to another gentleman we're having on the show. Speaking of shooters, Neil Melanson said hello as well. Remember Neil from Vegas? He's coming on the show, and there's a promotion that I'm doing called Shoot Pro Wrestling, Phil, and I'd love to have you maybe come in the broadcast booth with us, or maybe even do a super match. It's as the name describes, it's Shoot Pro Wrestling. It's all the matches are shoots. Some of the high rollers, grapplers are competing. Some of the UFC guys that are on main card are competing, and we need Phil. Maybe Phil could become part of the executive board too with me of that promotion and get you on board.
I'm down.
Well, guys, thanks again for your time, and Phil for coming on the Old School Shooters podcast. Do you have any closing comments for your fans? Where can people find you? That sort of thing.
I'm in Mexico, bro. Nobody could find me. I'm here for a reason.
Literally.
That's it.
I think you lost your feed, bro.
No,
Jack.
I'm good.
I think Jack is talking, isn't he? Jack? All right, Jack. Have a great night, man. I think we lost you, bro. Phil and I will sign off, and I'm going to sign off with a little joke.
I'm back. I'm back.
Give him one story. Give him a good story, King.
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you a story. I had a neighbor when I lived on the lake, and this girl was such a big fan of Phil's. She was an attractive woman, but she and this is a true story. I'm gonna tell you guys. No. You'll get this. But she wanted Phil so bad that she offered up her own daughter, her own 19-year-old daughter, for the New York Badass to smash, so that she could get a shot at the title. And that's a true story. Phil didn't want me to tell, but that's a true story. And you got to look out for those Southern women. They're a little wild like that sometimes.
Very good, King. Hit the tagline.
All right. Silver sages spreading wisdom to those of younger ages. The Old School Shooters. Thank you for tuning in, everybody, and happy holidays.